Hello, everybody. So welcome. This is one of our free monthly webinars. Language Dynamics Group sponsors a free monthly webinar on a topic that is related to the assessment and or teaching or intervention of language and literacy skills. Tonight, you have the pleasure of being with me, Dr. Megan Kirby. I'm the Director of Dissemination and Implementation Programs at Language Dynamics Group. And I'll be talking all about academic vocabulary from assessment to then instruction and ideas. Now, that's a lot to pack into 1 hour or really like 50 minutes and allowing for some Q&A time. So we're just going to jump in and get started. Beginning with, here's our agenda. I'm also going to jump into just introduction of Language Dynamics Group. But by the end of this, you will have a link to a QR code, but also we'll have a link to the webinar certificate. If you can't stay the whole time, or if you're watching this recording, so after the live version right now, we will be providing a link to you in a follow-up email. So no worries about that. That follow-up email will also contain instructions if you are submitting the certificate for professional development hours, specifically PDHs for ASHA. We do not enter those units in for you. We don't pay ASHA the right to do so. and similarly, BACB, if you're BCBA, those units, we do not enter that into their system for you either. So that is going to be your responsibility. Now, let's just jump into who we are and why we're here. So a little bit about Language Dynamics Group. We tackle the assessment of language, and then we provide, once you find a problem, right, we provide a solution for you, and that is with the Story Champs family. So tonight we'll start off with how do we assess academic vocabulary using, in particular, the cubed and the diamond assessments. And then I'll jump into, so you have a problem, what do you do about it? And then cover the Story Champs AAC expansion pack, as well as Story Champs, what exists now in the intervention kit. Here are all the people that represent us. This is it, y'all. So if you receive an email or you write us this, I will just tell you right now, it's probably Christy, myself. Christy is joining us from the West Coast, is up here in the right-hand corner. And this is myself right here in the purple background. We are full-time implementation dissemination program heads. What you see, the pictures you see right here are Trina and Doug. They are full-time professors. And so their relationship with Language Dynamics Group is that they started the company with Olivia there, and then Roger and his family and Karen, they're being the ones who ship the products to you out of a warehouse in Texas, United States of America. Sales, we've got Mike and Shane. We have Kathy, who's also helping out with sales right there. And then Cameron helps with dissemination and then program and product development as well. This beautiful person right here is Olivia Peterson. And lucky man up here, that's her husband, Doug, but Olivia is our graphic designer. So this beautiful, all of the graphics that we have and all the things that we put out, the illustrations, we can thank her. So here are all the people. I do want to add a disclaimer because you may be leaving this webinar saying, this didn't cover everything. This is not a training. This is a webinar. We provide training using the principles of adult instruction and effective teaching, decades of research. We embed those into asynchronous virtual trainings that you can do that are self-paced, self-guided, and or you could also hook up online live group trainings. So Christy and myself provide those, as well as in-person group trainings. We also provide those all over the world. So there is a lot to, in particular, the diamond and cubed, especially the narrative language measures. So if you're interested in those assessments that I'm going to be showing you, check out the trainings. Also check out the products. Story Champs, there's a lot to the academic vocabulary instruction lesson plans. I will be going over just briefly what they look like and some ideas for implementation, some tips for Story Champs instruction, generalization procedures, etc. But again, this is not this would be a horrible training if I thought this was going to be comprehensive. So you cannot learn all of this in 1 hour, but hopefully it's enough to get you going if you're just interested in starting, if you're interested in learning about these products that I'm going to present, and or you've been using it, but maybe you just kind of need some new ideas or want to know more about assessment or more about instruction. So I've put our website right here to learn more about training. You can also scan this QR code with your phone if you're not watching this right now, this webinar on your phone. And you can go to that site as well. All right. So academic vocabulary. This is a huge topic that is so important to us. It's just not even a topic. It is what it is. Academic language is so important to us at Language Dynamics Group. It's always connected to our research, and it's really foundational to then the assessments and the interventions and the procedures for teaching it. Everything that we have researched then goes into the product, and the product will have some touch in some way academic vocabulary. Okay, so academic language is really what we focus on. This is one of my favorite quotes. Academic language is pivotal skill repertoire, and it's pivotal for closing the achievement gap in school, right? But unfortunately, attention to it is nearly absent in all of these primary grades. So in order for you to address academic language, you need to have the right tools to assess it and to teach it. It can be a little bit confusing. I remember when so my background is in education. So when I was teaching, this was not a thing, academic language. But what I like to portray it as is a second language. We're not born speaking academic language. We acquire this language, most of us, in school, unless we have been raised in a home of academics, where we would be using that common academic language spoken at the dinner table. We'd pick up, however, therefore, although, considering, we would be using only those words if our social environment was reinforcing it. Otherwise, we're learning it in school and we leave it at school. Soon as we leave the doors and we go into our social environments, into the community in our homes, we're no longer going to use that language. It's workplace and school, right? So this is kind of what I'm talking about. We define it as the language that is used in school to help students acquire knowledge and to also demonstrate or produce or use that knowledge. Academic language is oral and it is written. It includes, but it's not all inclusive of, vocabulary, complex syntax, narrative and informational discourse. So your narrative and your expository discourse structures. And those are like the patterns at that discourse level. Like stories have a certain pattern. There are, I believe, like 8 different types of patterns for informational types of content or passages, like cause and effect or compare and contrast being 2 of them. And then also inferencing. So when we say academic language, we're not just talking about vocabulary. It's a whole lot more than vocabulary. I'll also just want to mention that most of the research that we have, not just Language Dynamics Group, but published in the research literature that scientists have done and continue to do, most of the research literature on how to improve vocabulary shows that it actually doesn't transfer to reading comprehension. So in other words, teaching vocabulary alone does not transfer to improvements in reading comprehension unless the other types or dimensions of academic language are included. So if you teach vocabulary and complex syntax and narrative and informational discourse structures and inferencing, or a combination thereof, then you might see some improvements in reading comprehension, okay? So do not teach, rule number 1, do not teach vocabulary in isolation. Bang my head against the wall. We have so much research that shows you have to teach it embedded in the context of some other activity that would make it meaningful. And in order to do that, right, you have to have this pre-planning your activities kind of already made and decided. So teach vocabulary in context, right? And then while you're doing that, you're can also work on story grammar, right? So the parts of stories, the key parts, informational and narrative discourse. And you just need to integrate all those aspects, if not all, multiple aspects of academic language. Okay. I mean, it's efficient. All right. This is just like a model of vocabulary or like a conceptual framework. You may have seen it where people are talking about tier 1 words, tier 2, tier 3. So I'll go over it in case you are not familiar, or let's just get on the same page. So tier 1, these are words that are basic words. They appear normal day-to-day conversation. So these would be vocabulary that you pick up outside of school anyway. So a lot of time is not spent teaching them in school because you are exposed to them in oral and written language and environmental print outside of the school walls, right? So they're high frequency words. They rarely require instruction. However, I do have it printed there in yellow text. Some students with significant language learning difficulties may need more explicit targeted instruction in core vocabulary, like those tier 1 words. And that would be for functional communication needs. So students do not have the vocabulary to communicate their basic wants and needs, right? You end up having a different means of communicating such, like problem behavior, self-injurious behavior, or physical aggression to get your wants and needs met because you lack this, right? So we have made the vocabulary targets of the Story Champs AAC expansion pack stories. So the vocabulary that's embedded in these stories are these types of tier 1 words. So we want the students, when you're using that program, to more fluently use the core vocabulary, know how to navigate their assistive technology or alternative augmentative communication devices or supports, and do so more independently with more than just one symbol use at a time, et cetera. So that's like the key parts of that. So then in terms of academic vocabulary, or really the content that you're mostly exposed to in school, tier 2 are what we call academic words or general academic vocabulary. They are going to be high utility words. So they're going to be words that can cross different domains. You may hear it in math class as well as see it printed on an instructional worksheet in reading or English language arts. Okay, so things like contradict, variety, surface. Also directions, like terms like define, describe, compare, contrast, those kind of things. And so in Story Champs, we call these sparkle words. And again, there's a lower frequency or occurrence in oral communication or conversation. You mostly see it printed in the text or spoken in an academic setting. Then finally, tier 3 words. Those are going to be found only in specific contexts or domain content areas, right? So generally, we don't hear these words very often or read them very often. So low frequency. They're limited to specific topics and disciplines. So if we are using Story Champs lesson plans for information, retail or information writing, so those titles of the lesson plans, you're going to know that the tier 3 vocabulary we refer to as new terms. Okay, so again, I'm just pointing out tier 1, 2, and 3, but when we're working with children with language difficulties, or even sometimes typically developing children who are struggling with comprehension, we probably need to be more intentional than just pointing out like what these words are when we come across them in our instruction. So if I'm a teacher, I'm not going to be like, this is a tier 2 word, remember it, that's it. No, we're going to need some more like explicit, systematic instruction and cumulative review or exposure over time in different contexts for the students to actually pick these things up. Now, we should also be intentionally using or including words, rather, that have multiple meanings, and also those meanings occur across different parts of speech. These are special types of words that are called polysemous words. So polysemous being up here, spelled it out for you. We have to watch out for these because students with developmental language disorder in particular really struggle with these multiple meaning words. English has a ton of them. So for example, I put the word ground here on this slide, but ground actually has 32 different meanings. I'm only showing 4 different meanings across 3 different parts of speech, right? So ground could be, I got grounded, right? So I got in trouble. So I can't participate and go outside anymore. I grounded the ball, so I laid it down. Something is on the ground, so the ground itself being firm or dry land, right? Or the ground itself, like so the soil versus being on the ground. So we're talking about all these. This is just 4 out of 32. So if we're teaching vocabulary words with only, and their vocabulary words really only have one meaning, we're doing a disservice to students, because when our students with developmental language disorder are coming across polysemous words, especially when they're reading in a text, they read it and then they think about the way they know the definition of, and they keep reading, and they also, it doesn't make sense, but they don't stop and let you know, right? So, which is a problem. So if we're teaching very too tightly, the definitions of words, or we're not planning to teach polysemous words, most of our words are just single definitions, we're really not helping them at all, right? So we do have, and I'll get to it, and Story of Champs does have lesson plans for how to teach students to use context clues to infer the meaning of new words, in particular polysemous words or tier 2 words. And that's the skill that we need to teach, not the definition of a million different words. I will say that there was a study that found that 36, so more than 1 out of 3 teacher utterances, so spoken language, included words or polysemous words with multiple meanings. And this is across K through 8, so kindergarten through 8th grade. 1 out of 3 utterances a teacher says includes these words. So again, that might be 1 out of 3 things that our students with DLD are not getting through listening. Okay, so I just something that we want to point out, because it's very confusing if you're comprehending a word differently than the way it was intended to be understood. Another part of academic vocabulary focuses also on morphemes, and those are the smallest units of meaning, and grammatical functions. So super cool, really easy. If you took Latin, you know that root words are morphemes. They have meaning themselves. And then when you add other morphemes in the form of a prefix or a suffix, right, it creates a whole new word. So we need our students to have strong morphological awareness skills to be able to understand, manipulate both, and there's 2 types, inflectional morphemes. So knowing that ed makes something a past tense, adding an s or an es makes something plural, so more than one. And then derivational morphemes, those are going to be the prefixes and suffixes, right? So this plays a really big role in vocabulary learning, word recognition, and reading comprehension at all levels of schooling. So like from the minute you enter formalized schooling till the minute you graduate, and hopefully onto vocational or advanced university schooling, this matters. So this is something else that we want to make sure that we address. And that brings us to the question of like, man, why isn't there more attention to vocab instruction in schools? There might be some attention to it that is already pretty strong. In fact, most academic language instruction only addresses vocabulary because it's easier to teach, and it's also easier to assess. We can quickly know if a student does or does not know the meaning of a word, and it'd just be a plus or minus, right? Really quick to assess and really quick to evaluate. But in school, the actual like systematic, explicit, and cumulative instruction in vocabulary isn't really happening, because I'm just like, because people don't care. No, it's not because of that. It's really like, we're so used to giving kids, and growing up, and maybe you all learned this too, of getting a dictionary, right? And teaching words in isolation, having them copy the definition into another piece of paper, right? And transcribe it over there, transfer it, and then create a sentence, right? And on their own, that kind of thing. And that's really not best practice teaching. That's teaching in isolation. When we're teaching vocabulary, we really should, and teachers just don't know this, I wasn't taught this way, really should be doing so in the context of like while we're doing storybook reading. So I taught kindergarten for 3 years, and I co-taught. So I had students with DLD and a variety of other, lots of autism. My favorite autistic learners, my favorite. So lots of autism, very particular love words. And then I had my, you know, typically developing students who may or may not have had difficulties with reading later on, right? And all of them are in this little like soup. And if I had known better, I would have prepared or picked storybooks that had polysemous words so I could stop and be like, huh, how are they using this word? But it also means this. So, like, how do we know what this meaning is? We would have done it more intentionally. The problem is that you need time to go do that. And then you need time to then also have picked out the polysemous words from this said storybook. And then you could also work on inferencing, right? So not everybody has the tools and resources, the education and instruction. It's really not the fault of us as educators that we're not paying more attention to it. If our curricula is not already programming it systematically, explicitly, and then across a cumulative, like they keep saying the words later on across different weeks and different contexts, then again, time and resources and education is going to bring it to there. So I'm just going to point out again, do not teach in isolation, but I would also say there's some good ideas out there that you can use and embed and instruct without using story champs that I'm going to get to shortly. All right, this brings us to our first word. You're going to have 2 words that you need to fill out on the certificate form. So to demonstrate that you have participated and completed this entire training, webinar. I said this isn't training. It's not. This webinar. So general academic vocabulary, that's the first term. It's going to be our first code word. Okay, so write that down. And I will proceed shortly. Okay. All right, so that takes us to, now we understand what academic vocabulary is in a nutshell. That takes us to, okay, well, how do we assess it? How do I know if my students need more explicit instruction? Is my existing ELA or English language arts curricula even covering this? Because if it's not, it'll show, if I assess it, it'll show that all of the students need instruction. I always laugh because it's almost like Oprah. And if you're familiar with her show at one point, might be aging myself. She would have every year there'd be a special event and she'd give away a car or something big, and she'd be like, and you get a car and you get a car. That's how it kind of feels when you do an assessment on academic vocabulary and language comprehension, is that suddenly like, oh my gosh, everybody needs intervention. And so what we thought was going to be tier 3 supports or intervention is really like a tier 1 problem, right? So we have to step back. So the cubed, when I get there, is a great assessment for program evaluation. But let's start off. I am going to start with a diamond, which is school age diagnostic assessment. Keyword diagnostic in terms of clinical diagnostic, educational services to identify a student if they have dyslexia and or DLD. Okay. So in the diamond, one of the subtests is like a test of inferential word learning. All right. And this is just an example of what the test is presented. There's a brief story and you would read it to the student and it has a made up word in it. And so, and I'm laughing because I know there's a story about some researchers when we were testing this out and piloting it, that some undergraduate students thought that this was a real word. And so I remember them, I don't know, I heard this and I guess someone told Doug or Cameron at one point, or maybe it was Christy, I didn't realize that that's what Benel meant. They are fake words. And so what we're trying to guess is the meaning of said word given the context clues, given this word in the context of this story. Okay. So I can't show you anything else. Proprietary, definitely copyright infringement. So if you want more information, we have webinars on our YouTube channel that give you a little bit more of a peek into the diamond. But again, this would be a diagnostic assessment because response to intervention, I'm doing intervention, the student is not progressing. So I've been showing that I've tried all of these interventions, still not progressing. There's an underlying condition there, and I want to rule out any bias. So this is also like super accurate, like above 90%, maybe even like 95 above that for English language learners, even, right? Multilingual students. We're ruling out language as a linguistic bias when we're doing this test of English. So I'm just pointing that out. This would be for identifying students who are at risk for or probably have a high likelihood of having dyslexia and or DLD. Now, this would be a subtest that would come for the developmental language disorder side of things. This is not related to dyslexia. Okay. And then Helen asked a question of, does Story Champs lessons, do they take into account and assist with English as a second language students? I will get to that. The answer is yes. We have over 10 publications in peer-reviewed journals with that population of students. Okay. Here is the cubed. So the cubed is an assessment suite. I think of it as like assessment to the third power. And that third power meaning that this assessment we have the dynamic decoding measures, which does not assessing vocabulary. Then we have the narrative language measures, reading, and narrative language measures, listening. So that's how I try to explain it. Now, this right here is Scarborough's rope in a nutshell of the language comprehension or upper strands of Scarborough's rope. And one of those skills is vocabulary. So you see it right here. There are so many other skills, right? And these gray shaded, that's the decoding or word recognition skills. But in terms of the language comprehension strands, these right here, vocabulary is one of these components. So the narrative language measures, or NLM, has specific ways of assessing a student's understanding and use of that complex academic language, words read, words spoken, the student's ability to make inferences about the meaning of unknown academic vocabulary that they may encounter. How do they use context clues? Do they, or they do need to be taught to make inferences about unknown words and their meanings. So this right here, just in a nutshell. We also have a manual. Then that technical manual, or the technical portion of it, contains a lot of information. So in the back, I believe it starts, in fact, I know it does. It starts on page 139. We provide benchmark alignments with the curriculum standards in the back of that manual. So for kindergarten through 6th grade, we're looking at, and we also used research samples as well as Common Core curricular standards. But we're looking at, okay, how do we come up with, for example, kindergarten, how many points are they supposed to have for vocabulary complexity? And by the end of kindergarten, we're really not looking for academic tier 2 vocabulary, surprisingly. You'd have to double check this against your own standards in Australia or in your own particular state. But most of the time, it's not going to be there. Now, they should be using at least one adverbial subordinate clause or conjunction. On the inferencing, though, we do expect students to be able to make inferences using context clues, answer questions about unknown words in a text. And so you'll see that we do have an ability, and I'll get to it in a second and show you the paper pencil form, but we do have the ability to ask students, hey, what's the meaning of this word, after we give them a sentence, so we can measure their ability to inference the meaning of this unknown tier 2 word. So here's what the narrative language measure looks like when it's administered digitally. It's awesome. Also transcribes the students' retail, and there's cool features with AI that are coming up soon. But the NLM reading, narrative language measures reading, and the listening assessments, both of those assess inferential vocabulary as well as the students' use of general academic vocabulary that are embedded in the story. So their ability to listen and then produce or demonstrate knowledge of what those words mean or how to use them in their retell, as well as the WH questions. We also have tier 3 or domain specific words and content embedded in every story as well. So this is the paper pencil version of the narrative language measures. I just pulled up an example from the kindergarten NLM. And so we don't expect them to read. So the kindergarten forms are going to be all listening forms. So they listen to a story and then you say, thanks for listening. Now you tell me that same story. Try to include as many details as you can in your story. They retell, nothing's in front of them, right? And we're measuring, one, are they using any of these complex tier 2 words that were embedded in this story here? So we had tumbling, diligently, constantly, desperately, and clasp. So those words were embedded. Did the student produce any of those words in their retell? We also have 2 blank areas where the student may have used another different, that's not embedded in the story, different vocabulary, tier 2 general academic vocabulary word, and you can give them up to 2 points for credit of things, so up to 2 words that are not embedded in the story. But most of the time we want to be able to see, hey, if you listen to this and later on when you read this, are you demonstrating knowledge of these general academic vocabulary words because you're producing that in your retell? And that is a big predictor versus, hey, what do these words mean? Inferential vocabulary, we're able to assess a student's ability to infer the meaning of unknown words that are general academic vocabulary using context clues. 90% of the words that you and I have learned is through inferencing. There is no way that we will ever be able to teach children, no matter, with and without differing abilities, every single word that they need to know for the rest of their life. Instead, what we need to be teaching them is the actual skill of inferencing. Okay, so I can assess the student's ability to make inferences about unknown words and their meanings on the narrative language measures form. Okay, so both reading and listening have these 2 parts. For example, this one right here, Scott was tumbling off his skateboard. He kept getting hurt. What does tumble mean? Right. And so the gray text right here, he kept getting hurt, is actually the context clue. Right. So if the student was like, he kept getting hurt or to get hurt, I would then be like, what else does it mean? And I'm going to assess and I score based on their response, their ability to produce a definition, because I ask them what it means and they say, tumble means to fall. Perfect. 3 points. If they say something to the extent of, I tumbled down a stairs last night and I got hurt too. It shows that they understand how the word is used, and it's the same part of speech. So there's knowledge there, but they didn't give me a definition like I asked. So it's like a 2-pointer. Student says, I don't know, or doesn't respond, or gives you an incorrect response. You go to this forced choice is question B. And at that point, if they didn't get a score of 3 or a 2, they can only get a score of 0 or 1. They either get it right or wrong. So does tumble mean to ride or to fall? And on the paper forms, and then also on the digital forms, we tell you what the answer should be, so that you can listen for it. So if they say it means to fall, they get a point. And if they give you the wrong answer, they get 0 points. So there's 3 words. And so there's 3 opportunities to get anywhere between a 0 or a 3 for each of the words. More information about how to administer the narrative language measures, reading and listening, is available in a training. I believe it's 7 hours, y'all. Christy and I put it together. Here is another tool that is really great. Does not rely on use of the narrative language measures passages. It also can be used for writing. So in the back, in the appendix, I believe it's Appendix A of the Cubed manual. And by the way, like the paper pencil form of Cubed is free to download from our website. I'll give you a link later with the QR code so that you can go download it and check it out. It's a big zip folder of all this stuff. So this is in there. It's in the manual. And it is even color coded. Now, I could have, I can collect a written language sample. So I asked the student to, or maybe my whole class, to write a story about what they did this weekend, right? And then I can take this rubric and assess in particular vocabulary. So did they use, I'll start from the top and I work my way down. Typically I go up because it's very rare that students, unless I have provided explicit instruction, it's very rare that students are using these tier 2 words, idioms, analogies, metaphors, similes. It's very rare. So if they use 1, they get 1 point. If they have 2 in their language sample, they're written or oral, can also have them produce. So if their writing is horrible, they could read it to you and you can audio record it so that you can transcribe it later and then assess it accordingly. We do that in research for writing when kids can't understand what they wrote handwriting wise, but you can't write what you can't say. So if they say it, it means they wrote it. And then up to 3 points. We don't score above a 3 because once you hit 3 in your passage, you're good to go. I'm not worried about vocabulary or rhetoric for you in particular. I might be worried that you're not using something like dialogue, or you're not using temporal or causal subordinate clauses. You're not using noun verb modifiers like adjectives and adverbs, or relative pronouns, that, which, who, whose, whomever, that kind of thing, wherever, so on and so forth. So I might be interested in other aspects of sentence complexity or sentence level academic complexity. But just know again that we do have a measure of vocabulary there for you. All right. Let me see if there's any questions while we get into teaching, because I'm going to address Helen's comment. All right. So how do we go about teaching academic vocabulary? So once we have found that there is a problem, our students don't know how to infer the meaning of unknown words, and goodness knows I don't have enough time in any particular day, let alone an academic year, to teach them all of the words that they need to know and all of the meanings of those words, then I have a problem, right? We have answered that or addressed that, and made sure to provide all of these things and these features. Now, with or without Story Champs, I'm just going to point this out. You as an instructor need to have a systematic focus on vocabulary instruction. Okay. You are going to need to teach some words very explicitly or systematically, right? So, but we also need to make sure that there is this focus instruction that offers repeated exposure and practice to new vocabulary words that the students have been purposefully exposed to, not incidentally. And then across the day, across the month, that they don't see these words one time and then they never see them again. We never discuss them again. They need to be repeatedly embedded into our curriculum or our readings, our passages, those kind of things. That takes a lot for a curriculum developer, by the way. That's a lot of intentional curriculum development. We do that for Story Champs. Kudos to Trina and Doug and everybody. So you also need to provide lots of opportunities to use the word and see the word in different contexts. So not only just in ELA, but we need to use it maybe in other classrooms. Polysemous words, we need to make sure that we're providing different types of contexts in which the word appears, but it means different things according to that context. And then we also need to teach strategies. So the students are going to need strategies to get word meanings, to be able to glean the meaning of a word through context clues, through reading, and through listening. And that's it. So these are for McCune and colleagues. This is a paper. This is like exactly what we need to have for systematic, focused vocabulary instruction. These are 4 things, right? And it's all based on research literature. You do these 4 things, we will have success, we'll have effectiveness. There's also, remember I mentioned the morphological awareness. So there's large evidence base to support morphological awareness instruction. There's lots of studies that have included students with language and literacy difficulties as participants. So it's not just like with typically developing kids. No, morphological awareness interventions in a lot of the publications, they're published in speech and language pathology journals or focused journals. And SLPs often target root words, so speech language pathologists. If you're in Australia, speechies. So they target root words and they target the prefixes and suffixes. And then they teach students about word families and then the shared meanings. So here's an example where the word port, right? There's all these different words that we can make out of port by adding or subtracting, right? So this one word, we can add ant and we get important, right? We can also just add IM and we get import, report, reporting. So you're seeing both the derivational, right? Which you got the prefixes and suffixes, as well as, I'm trying to think, porter, because I thought that was really cool. I don't think that we tend to use that at all. But anyway, so you're looking at the derivational, which is adding the ly and the ings, and you're also looking at the inflectional, which is ing and adding s to make it plural. Okay, sorry, getting off, looking at the time, and I'm like, ooh, we'll speed up. Story Champs instructional tools that teach, we have the kit as it exists, so Story Champs 2.0, we have an English only version and a bilingual English-Spanish. And then we have the Story Champs AAC expansion kit as well. So right now, this is the Story Champs family. Here are a couple of goal ideas for vocabulary that you can address using Story Champs lessons. So the first one would be like for definitions. So during a weekly oral reading activity, using a passage that has at least 5 general academic words, so right, tier 2 words. And I usually will list examples in my goal so people know what I'm talking about when I say general academic words. The learner will independently provide synonyms or definitions for at least 80% of the words when requested, as measured on 4 to 5 weekly probe. So once a week, I'm assessing this during an oral reading activity, and I'm just like, my passage, I make sure it has at least 5, because that's how you're going to get to 80%, by the way. Make sure that your math always lines up. And then on top of that, glare, prance, slender, right? I got 2 more. I could literally can just ask the kid and be like, okay, so what does that mean? And if they give me a synonym, or they say, oh, it means blah, 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 and they're accurate, plus, right, on my data sheet. So that's it. That's just definitional knowledge. You can also target students' improvement in the lasting ability, which is like the thing we actually want, to figure out what new words mean using context clues. This is the critical life skill that if I teach you this, like, world's open for you and you don't need me. Story champs can address a inferencing goal like this. And number 2, so after reading or listening to a grade level fictional passage with 3 or more embedded, unfamiliar, less common academic vocabulary words, you can make this shorter. Learner will use context clues to independently. That's it. So they're using the context clues, but not any of your teacher prompts. No adult behavior in student goals, by the way. Get your adult behavior out of there. No prompts. Independently and correctly, because that matters, define at least one of those 3 words per passage per week, right? And I just made up like for 7 out of 9 weeks. So once a week for 7 weeks out of a 9-week grading period, right? It allows them like 2 weeks of really bad, like 1 absences or 2 really bad weeks. So these are ideas. If you want more ideas for vocabulary, we have a previously recorded webinar all about goal writing. And it includes way more than this. And it's an hour long, and it's on our YouTube channel. Okay. So Story Champs itself has 4 different types of instructional targets for vocabulary. Okay. We provide a means for you to deliver that systematic, explicit, and cumulative vocabulary instruction, starting with explicitly teaching the words that appear in the classic stories. The classic stories are at level A and level B classic in that section of the storybook. There are words that are printed there. You would explicitly teach those, all right? Another one would be to explicitly teach the vocabulary, the general academic vocabulary that are embedded in the Blitz stories, right? Across all levels. So there's a lesson plan for that here. Then we have a lesson plan on how to infer the meaning of general academic or tier 2 vocabulary using Story Champs Blitz stories only at level A and B, because like the stories are written with the specialized font that shows you what the context clue is. And then you would basically ask them questions. So I'll show you a little bit more about this in a second. And then last but not least, we also have ones for like Spot the Sparkle and Information Sparkle, so tier 3. So we cover a lot. Now, for this, I'm going to show you a specific lesson plan. This one is all about that ultimate goal of teaching students how to infer the meaning of unknown words. Okay, so like this is key. We have what's called an add-on lesson plan. It's number 60. And it says, hey, you're going to need the sparkle icons. You need to use the storybook, but only at level A or level B story, but in the Blitz section of the storybook. You're going to pick please only pick 2 to 3 black bold words. Right, so that's it. And then you need to make sure that you combine this lesson plan with one of these lesson plans and the numbers are based on like the formatting. So if you have 5 or more students, you'd use a large group lesson plan, 2 to 4 students, small group. So make sure you're combining it with one of these lesson plan numbers. And then obviously you're going to pick, I say 2 to 3 of those words, and you'll see that the clues are in the storybook. They're like in its own table. So what you would do is you would then just kind of preface, hey, all right, we're going to listen for some new words. There's going to be some words in the story today that you haven't heard, okay? And then that's literally all I do. Model the story. So I'm going to display particular illustrations. Since the Blitz story, there's 8 illustration cards. So these are the illustration numbers that I need. I don't need all 8. I need only 5 pictures, and these are the picture numbers. Then I read the story, and I'm putting out the story grammar icons. I don't put out sparkle icons yet. Right. So I'm putting out story grammar icons out. Right. And when I come across one of those 2 or 3 words that I've picked out or targeted for those black bold words, I put out a sparkle icon. So that's what we would do. Right. Then I would continue with just implementing the rest of the lesson plan. I would say, all right, so let's see if we can figure out what that word means. I'm going to reread it, and I want you to listen out. And we would reread. The lesson plan basically tells you reread the part of the story that has the italicized font and kind of emphasize it to the students and be like, oh, did you hear that? Oh, I wonder if that's a clue. So you're teaching a metacognitive skill of how to think about inferencing, right? And so we're teaching kids by thinking out loud as an instructor. The steps are very explicit. And then it says finish the rest of the steps of the master lesson plan. So that other lesson plan that you combine it with, you would then go into your like champs checks if you're doing large group or small group activities, et cetera. So very explicit, very easy to use. The way we have the lesson plans with the checkboxes, those are like fidelity checks, implementation fidelity checks for you. If you want someone else to watch you, give them a copy of this. Or if you want to teach someone how to implement these lessons, maybe a gen ed teacher, and then you're the interventionist who's pushing in and you want to kind of fade out and you want them to start using it in their classroom, give them a copy and ask them to score you, make up some kind of, it's not a bad lie, it's like a white lie, where you have to do it for homework. So like they have to watch and like score you and see if you're doing it correctly. Basically by doing that, you're teaching them because they're observing your lesson and they're also like looking at what the steps are. Easy way to teach people. Without them knowing. Also, we have another lesson plan add-on number 61, and that also gets us to work on those tier 2 general academic vocabulary. This is Spot the Sparkle. So you might hear something like Spot the Sparkle posters. We have posters for every single one of the words that are in bold in those Blitz stories, which is crazy. We have a lot of posters. How you find them is when you download the digital presentation, the digital resources. It's like a zip folder and you unzip it. You'll see that there's like these folders here. There's Spot the Sparkle posters. Then you would basically click on that and then you can see that we have so many. There's a bold word that's big. That's the word that's in the storybook. Then there's a bunch of synonyms in the upper right-hand corner that are, some are easier than others, some are harder than the word that's in bold right there. Okay. Also, I want to point out that Story Champs makes it easy for us to teach metalinguistics. One of the ways that we do that is by building in repetitions and reviews of these sparkle words that I've exposed you to. So they're in the stories already, but I just want to point out too, we don't go from like one level to the other. So I put this right here, that's a rule. If I'm working on level A stories, there's a reason why I'm doing it because I'm using a specific lesson plan. But over time, as my students are learning and we're progressing and we're working on different targets, they will eventually see these words again, and they do come up in these different levels. So they do get the exposure. It might be across 1 year, it might be across many years. All right. So just know that there are reviews and repetitions of sparkle words that are built into the stories when you get to Blitz level C through J as well. All right. I also point out that using cycles, like you're going to go through level A stories and you would only switch to a level B if your lesson plan tells you to do so. And you would only switch lesson plan because you assessed and saw the kids made progress. So you're picking another instructional target, which would then have you go to the lesson plan, master lesson plan book, and find a new lesson plan, and then follow the directions about what level to use. But we also want you to teach only 2 to 4 words at a time. Now in level A, there's only 2 words. But when you start getting more and more and more words that are embedded into these stories and they're longer and more complex, please only pick 2 to 4 words. Okay, that brings us to the Story Champs AAC expansion pack. All right, right here is, and this is a list of some of the words in the stories. They also have pronouns, prepositions, conjunctions, helping words or verbs. So there's way more embedded in the story than this, but this gives you an idea for maybe vocabulary like people, settings, and emotions. But in every single story, we have a target, and then the lesson plan tells you what to do about these words. We have a targeted noun, a verb, and adjective. So every story and every lesson that you're doing, you are targeting the student's ability to navigate, find, and use appropriately like one noun, one verb, one adjective. Okay. Here's an example. So you've got this story that you would read first, and then you eventually get across a different lesson plan. Or I mean, across the lesson plan steps, you get to this, you read the simplified story and you withdraw your help, and you're helping the student, or you're modeling their ability to press sick and soup and sleep, right? So those are our targets. So that's just an idea there of what's going on. And then also other pointers. So if they're, and this goes for anything, I'm going to use the Story Champs word terminology, but this goes for how to teach vocabulary in general. So if you're working on, let's say, narrative instruction or narrative intervention, academic language, story retells, if a student is not using a word correctly, immediately interrupt and prompt them how to use it. All right. So then you want them to say it. So you don't move on. You don't say like, oh, well, you forgot to use this word. Continue. So then you want to get them to say it. Right. Great. But actually, can you say that again, but use that sparkle word, or tell them what the word was? Because a lot of times they didn't use the sparkle word because they didn't remember it. Tell them what the word means and how to use it, right? So remember, that word was unkempt. Remember, unkempt means messy. And then now you say that, okay? And then they say it and you're done. That's the correction procedure. This is the 4-step correction procedure for errors that's going to get the kid to remember these words and then use them again. And then, of course, generalization and that concept, you can reinforce use of vocabulary words in like all academic activities and a lot of social activities. So you've got teacher read alouds, like, oh, that sounds like a sparkle word. And it's not even a Story Champ story, right? So you're using that terminology. You could also say like, oh, I wonder if there's some clues around here, or let's listen to that story again, like this paragraph, and see if we can figure out what that word means. It sounds like a multiple meaning word, right? And so you're working on that. You can also, and this is important, practice using clues to figure out the meaning of a word or the shade of meaning. We have to be asking like, wait, how do you know? I want to check their, like, are they using a text connection, a text to text connection? Are they using information from the passage or the text to back up their answer? I want to know that that's how they're getting to the answer and they aren't just lucky. And then of course you can use nonfiction books. You can use the Sparkle word banks. You can do writing activities, right? So we have writing lesson plans, we have word journals. And so there's all sorts of different activities that you can use. All right, that brings us to the second, there's only 2 words or 2 terms for our webinar certificate. So the second term is going to be tier 2. Tier 2. So there's multiple choice questions on the certificate form. It says, what was the first term and what's the second term? And so you would pick those out. All right. Okay. So I have, and I'll answer this right now. So Story Champs, you can learn more information about Story Champs right here. And Helen earlier, very early on, had asked us, do Story Champs lessons take into account and assist with English as a second language, the learners? Answer is yes, because, well, one, I already know that in Portland, there are ESOL or ESL, English as a second language, or ELL classes in high school that are using Story Champs, because it's a quick way for them to learn English, but also to learn like social norms and rules in this country that they are now in really quickly. And it's not babyish because they already know it's like very simple and easy. They don't care, but they're learning really quickly and they like it because it's really fast and it's effective. In addition to that, though, we do have tons of research that go and show actually Story Champs being used to teach English as a second language itself in Mexico. And that's super cool. I love it. And that article is available in Spanish first, and English is translated into English. So it was done by a Mexican researcher, not by us. And then we have a bunch of publications about bilingual Story Champs. And so it's not just about Spanish, English. We have some for any language where English is the primary language being used in academic instruction. So how do we get students to learn that? Yes, we have studies where that is the primary goal. And students may come from Haitian Creole, French. Then we've got students who may speak Urdu. Spanish. I'm trying to think. There's a bunch, like a bunch of languages. If you live anywhere in the United States, I can tell you right now, there's most of the time, you have other languages besides English and social English going on in your communities. And so we care about that actively. Now, you could also learn more about the Cubed 3 and the Diamond assessments as well. Those are some tools. Christy put the certificate form in the chat. So if you're ready to like check out, I'm done with me, peace out, you can go ahead and click that link and then use those terms. Some of the research that I used to get us here today is relatively recent. Our AAC study that goes into how students did pick up multisyllable or multi-symbol use and vocabulary. That's out, that's free to read. There it is. Dr. Gutierrez, Arvizu, that's right there. And today I was talking about, it's printed in Spanish first. I think this one I linked is in English. We've got one for students who are deaf and hard of hearing, one about family engagement activities for dual language preschool instruction. I worked on that one when I was in Tampa, Florida. That was with Spanish, bilingual Spanish Head Start classrooms. Do just a lot. This is actually only through 2023. So 2021, 2020. Okay. In the past 5 years, but we have way more. Irene asked, who is this designed for? Gen Ed teachers, tier 2 SLPs. Irene, it's designed for multi-tiered implementation or use. So if you are a Gen Ed teacher, it's aligned with your curriculum between preschool and grade 3. After grade 3, this is an intervention. Your students should have these skills. I'm also going to talk about this for a second. Tier 2 interventions, we have lots of school districts and states using story champs as tier 2 intervention or tier 3 intervention for like language comprehension. And then SLPs are very familiar with it as well for intervention. Other tools that are really cool that I did not cover that are available on trinastoolbox.com, but I take you right to them. The NLM flowchart, oh, that's not on her toolbox, but that NLM flowchart I showed you that's in the Cubed manual, I just got it separated out for you so you don't have to look for it in the appendix. But Dr. Trina Spencer, who's the co-developer of Story Champs, she has come up with some other research projects and published like storybook bookmarks that have targeted vocabulary words for preschoolers, storybook reading procedures, like how to go about teaching vocabulary while doing dialogic reading and storybook reading. And then currently ongoing for the foreseeable future, ALPS project, so academic language profiling system. That was sampling like thousands and thousands of kids between, I think, K and kindergarten through 3rd grade in the United States, and written oral language samples, narrative and expository and vocabulary, and then coming up with like what kind of words should kids learn at certain grade levels. So keep an eye on that. You can go there. I know that she's got maybe kindergarten done, but there's some handouts, and there's also tons of assessment materials. And I just think it's really cool. I helped with that project. Okay, other questions. I'm going to put up, this is the webinar certificate. The certificate form link is also in the chat. I'm going to throw this up here, but if you have any questions, be happy to answer them since we got to the end of our webinar. I didn't run over. So proud of myself. I believe you can I allow?
It was great, Megan. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Well, then, if that's it for everybody, have a wonderful rest of your day. And feel free to reach out with any resources. Give us a few days to get the PowerPoint slides and any other resources to you. So sometime next week, if you're watching this webinar and it's already recorded on our YouTube, you can reach out to us at training@languagedynamicsgroup.com and request any of those resources as well.